and now for something completely different. I've never spoken before about some of the subjects which I've been interested in for about 20 years, maybe slightly more. And one of them involves what you might call ancient technology. And no, I'm not going down the alien road, or I try to be constrained by reality, and I know that there's an awful lot of conspiracy theory in this subject area. But what I find particularly fascinating is the way that our ancient ancestors were able to move very large stones and carve them, particularly hard stone like granite, with great detail. And allegedly they didn't have power tools of any description, yet they were able to carve massive stone blocks into very precise shapes, often with very sharp inside edges, and transport them often hundreds and hundreds of miles. This happened in Egypt, many parts of South and Latin America, Asia, places like Angkor in Cambodia. And the history books, as far as I can gather, kind of gloss over a lot of the way that these things were supposedly done. And with regard to some of that, there's one idea that I had, that I came up with over 20 years ago, which I know I'm not the only one to have noticed this, but it's not easy to find any information about this on the internet that I can find. And that is the fact that the moon is 2,160 miles in diameter. Now you might wonder, so what? The point is that number, 2,160, is astronomically significant. And it seems that when you invent, or when human beings have come up with a unit of measurement, it's usually based on something. You take the French took the distance from the North Pole to the equator and divided it by 10 million, I think, and came up with the meter. And then the meter is divided by 100 into centimeters, divided by another 10 into millimeters, and so on. And they didn't get it particularly accurate. This was, I think, during it's either the 18th or the 19th century. But when you divide the diameter of the moon by 2,160, you get the mile, which is 1,760 yards. And that's the modern mile, which we use now. There's a little bit of a grey area. There's uncertainty about exactly where the origin of the mile came from. And there's also seems to be slight variations in what a mile was. Some people attribute it to the Romans, and the mile, the mil, similar to millimeter. Millimeter is 1,000th of a meter. A mile is said to be 1,000 paces. I would say you'd have to have pretty large, a long stride to be able to cover a mile with 1,000 paces. So yeah, the implication, and here I need to digress slightly and explain why the number 2,160 is significant. There is an astronomical phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes, which is connected with the wobble of the Earth's axis. The Earth orbits the Sun once every year, and it spins on its axis 365.5 24219 times during this time. So that's how many days are in a year. And the direction of the axis that the Earth is pointing at this point in time is pointing towards, or very close to, the star Polaris. Now, over a 25,920 year period, that changes and describes a big circle in the night sky, and then returns back to Polaris again. But that will take 25,920 years to do so. You divide that number by 12, you get 2,160, and that is what some people call an astrological age. We are now, at this point in time, on the edge of Pisces and Aquarius. The significance of calling this we're coming into the age of Aquarius, means that on the spring equinox, which is the point on the Earth's orbit where we cross the ecliptic. But if you look at a chart of the night sky, you will see that there's what's called the ecliptic, which is the line all around the night sky, which from our point of view, the sun travels around this line, and so do all of the other planets. It's the plane of the orbit of the solar system. So you have the sun at the center, then you have Mercury, you have Venus, you have the Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, all on this plane, with very slight variations, but that is the ecliptic. And then because the Earth is tilted at 23.5 degrees from this ecliptic as it orbits the Sun, it goes round once every year, there are 2 points. Like, pause there. You look at the axis of the Earth points towards a particular point in the sky, and then the equator, you draw a line out from that. That also makes a line on the sky, and that's 23.5 degrees different from the ecliptic, which is the plane of the orbit of the planets in the solar system. And twice every year, those two imaginary lines intersect. One is on the spring equinox, one is on the autumn equinox. And when that happens, the spring equinox, at this point in time, the constellation of stars beyond where the sun is, from our point of view, it's halfway between Pisces and Aquarius. And then you go back in time, it was Taurus and Leo and other constellations. Not that I put, I think tabloid horoscopes are, pretty nonsensical. And the whole subject of astrology, I would say, is questionable, but that's, just my opinion. But the point is, that I'm taking a long time to get to, our ancient ancestors had a pretty amazing understanding and knowledge of this thing we call the precession of the equinoxes. And the significant numbers of that, the fact that it takes 2,160 years to move from one astrological age to another, was, according to Wikipedia, or, generally understood history, was discovered by the Greeks about 2,000 years ago. But it seems pretty obvious to me that that knowledge is much older than the Greeks. The Egyptians certainly had it. They incorporated similar numbers in many of their monuments and pyramids. And I would suggest that it goes back a good bit further than that. And then, so yeah, the bottom line is, it seems pretty obvious to me that there were highly intelligent people many, many thousands of years ago, potentially during the last ice age. And this takes me to reading Graham Hancock. Some of you may have heard of him. Described by some as a pseudoscientist, he sort of self-describes as being interested in exciting possibilities. But one thing which I think is certainly true is he takes a lot of the astronomical significance of the alignments of ancient monuments a lot more seriously than many of the people who directly study them, the archaeologists. So and he also has mentioned, I heard him in a podcast not so long ago mentioning the diameter of the moon being 2,160 miles. But the thing is, how did people a long, long time ago know how big the moon was? Certainly the Greeks, from the Greeks onwards, they were able to figure it out, but it's really accurate. It's not 2,170 miles, it's not 2,150 miles, it's 2,160. And that number happens to correspond with modern measurements. Anyhow, this video is probably getting long, and I will return to this sort of subject in the future, no doubt. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.